Robert Kiyosaki was 9 years old when he asked a grown man to make him rich. The man laughed, not unkindly. He said, "All right, show up Saturday morning." That single Saturday would turn into one of the most widely read money books ever written. And it starts with something almost every kid can relate to. Kiyosaki had a rich friend and a poor father, and he couldn't understand why the smarter of the two men was the one struggling. This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Kiyosaki grew up with two father figures. His biological father, the one he calls Poor Dad, was highly educated, a university department head working toward a doctorate, well respected in his field. His best friend Mike's father, the one he calls Rich Dad, never finished the 8th grade. And yet, according to Kiyosaki, one of these men would go on to build a business empire. The other would spend much of his life in financial stress, despite the fancy title. Kiyosaki says the entire book is built on that contradiction. Two men, similar income at times, completely different relationships with money, and it all started to unfold. At a convenience store, on a Saturday morning, for 10 cents an hour. Part 1. The rich don't work for money. Rich Dad agreed to teach young Robert and his son Mike how to get rich. On one condition, they'd work for him first. 10 cents an hour. Saturdays. Dusting cans on a shelf. After a few weekends of this, Robert was furious. 10 cents an hour felt like an insult. So, on his own father's advice, he marched in and demanded better pay. Rich Dad's response wasn't what anyone expected. He offered to stop paying them completely. "Work for free," he said, "or walk away." Confused and a little humiliated, the boys kept showing up anyway, and it was during those unpaid Saturdays, hanging around a store that regularly threw out its unsold comic books, that Robert noticed something. Nobody was allowed to resell those comics, but nobody said anything about lending them. So the boys gathered the discarded comic books, set up shop in Mike's basement, hired Mike's little sister to run the front desk, and opened a comic book library, 10 cents admission. Read as many as you like. It worked. For a few months, two 9-year-olds were running a small, profitable little business, entirely their own idea. It eventually shut down after a scuffle broke out in the makeshift library. But by then, Rich Dad's point had already landed. He hadn't taught them a trade. He taught them to stop waiting for a paycheck and start looking for an opportunity instead. But that raises a bigger question. If working for a wage isn't really the path to wealth, then what actually is? Rich Dad had an answer, and it involved a word most families never taught their children at all. Part 2. Why teach financial literacy? Rich Dad's next lesson centered on two words most people think they already understand: asset and liability. His definition was almost uncomfortably simple. An asset puts money into your pocket. A liability takes money out of it. Here's where it gets controversial. Kiyosaki argues that most people believe their own home is an asset, when by his definition, it's actually a liability because of the mortgage, taxes, maintenance, and interest constantly draining money out rather than putting money in. He says this single misunderstanding is one of the biggest reasons everyday working people struggle financially, even when their income looks respectable on paper. The pattern he describes for most middle-class households goes like this: earn a salary, spend it on liabilities disguised as assets, and never actually build a column of things that generate income on their own. The wealthy, he says, follow a completely different pattern. They acquire assets first, and let those assets eventually pay for the liabilities and luxuries. So, if the house isn't the asset, and the paycheck isn't the answer, what's left? Kiyosaki says the wealthy figured out something that has nothing to do with the job title at all. Part 3. Mind your own business. Here's a distinction Kiyosaki makes that trips a lot of people up. Your profession is not your business. You might work as an accountant, a manager, an engineer. That's your profession. But Rich Dad's argument is that your actual business is whatever asset column you're quietly building on the side, outside of work hours, regardless of what your job title says. Rich Dad's advice was blunt. Keep your day job for stability if you need to, but pour your extra effort and money into building your own column of assets, rental property, investments, a small business, rather than pouring every spare dollar into looking successful. Most people, he says, spend their entire working lives building someone else's business and call it a career. But even building your own assets runs into a wall most people don't see coming. A system that quietly takes a bigger bite out of the person with less financial knowledge. And Kiyosaki says understanding that system goes back centuries. Part 4. The history of taxes and the power of corporations. Kiyosaki walks through a brief, simplified history lesson here how taxes were originally introduced as temporary measures, often aimed only at the wealthy, and how over time they expanded to the general population. His core argument is that the wealthy responded to taxation by using a tool most employees never touch, the corporation. In his telling, a corporation isn't just a big company, it's a legal structure that changes the order in which money gets taxed and spent. An employee, he explains, typically earns, gets taxed, and then spends whatever is left. A corporation can spend first and get taxed on what remains. Kiyosaki frames this as one of the starkest differences between how employees and business owners are allowed to handle money under the same legal system. But building a corporation, owning assets, understanding tax structure, none of that matters if you can't actually spot a good opportunity when it appears. And Kiyosaki says most people walk right past them every single day. Lesson 5. The rich invent money. This chapter opens with a real estate story from Kiyosaki's own life. A property he came across that was priced far below its real value, because the seller needed to move quickly. Most people, he says, would have walked past that opportunity simply because they didn't have cash sitting around. Kiyosaki's argument is that the rich don't necessarily start with more money. They start by recognizing an opportunity and then get creative about financing it afterward. He calls this inventing money, the ability to see a deal that others miss and structure a way to make it work, rather than waiting until you've saved enough to do it the conventional way. In his view, financial opportunities appear constantly. What's rare isn't the opportunity. It's the financial education needed to actually recognize one. Which brings up an uncomfortable question for anyone chasing a bigger salary. If opportunity and financial creativity matter more than how much you earn, is chasing a raise actually the wrong goal entirely? Lesson 6. Work to learn, not to earn. Kiyosaki shares a decision from his own early career that puzzled almost everyone around him. After finishing school, he took a sales job at a major corporation, not because it paid the most, but because he was terrified of public speaking and rejection, and knew he needed to get good at both. Rich Dad's advice echoed the same theme. Choose jobs and experiences for the skills they teach you, not just a number on the paycheck. Specifically, Rich Dad pointed to 2 skills almost no school teaches directly: sales and marketing, and a broad understanding of how money and business actually work, accounting, investing, law, and how markets move. Kiyosaki's argument is that people who chase only salary often plateau because they never deliberately built the skills that would let them create their own income streams later. People who work to learn keep expanding what they're capable of long after any single job ends. But knowing all of this doesn't automatically make it easy. Kiyosaki spends an entire section of the book on why so many people understand these ideas and still never act on them. Overcoming obstacles. Kiyosaki identifies 5 emotional barriers that keep people stuck even after they understand the financial concepts. Fear of losing money, which keeps people frozen in place. Cynicism, which talks people out of opportunities before they even try. Laziness, often disguised as being too busy to look into anything new. Bad habits, especially around paying yourself last instead of first. And arrogance, assuming that what you don't know can't hurt you. Of all of these, he spends the most time on fear specifically, the fear of failing, which he argues stops far more people than any actual financial mistake ever could. His argument is unusually blunt. The rich aren't necessarily less afraid of losing money. They've simply made peace with the possibility of failure, treating it as part of the process instead of a reason to never begin. Getting started. Toward the end of the book, Kiyosaki offers a short practical list for readers wondering where to actually begin things, like finding a reason strong enough to keep you motivated, practicing financial literacy daily, and treating your own life as a business, even while employed by someone else. None of it is complicated. Most of it is uncomfortable. And that, according to Kiyosaki, is exactly why so few people ever do it. Closing the 2 dads. So, what happened to the 2 men at the center of this story? Kiyosaki's biological father, Poor Dad, the highly educated one, eventually lost his job later in life and struggled financially for years afterward, despite his credentials. Rich Dad, the man with less than an 8th grade education, went on to become one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii, building a business empire that outlived him. Same era, same island. 2 completely different relationships with money. Kiyosaki's point, in the end, isn't that education doesn't matter. It's that there's a specific kind of education, the kind about money itself that almost nobody is formally taught. And whether you learn it early, at 10 cents an hour, or later in life, the way most of us do, Kiyosaki's argument is that it's never too late to start asking the questions 9-year-old Robert asked on that Saturday morning. That's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If this summary was useful, let me know in the comments which idea surprised you most, and subscribe for more book breakdowns like this one.